Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back virtually and in person to the Peterson Institute for International Economics. I'm the Institute's president, Adam Posen, and I am very happy to have the occasion to do something a little unprecedented during IMF week. We are here to discuss today the country of Liechtenstein's path to IMF membership, which I think deservedly we are casting as advancing good economic policy in the face of disinformation. The basic story is that for a variety of reasons, Liechtenstein, almost uniquely among high-income economies, had not yet been a member of the IMF. There had been discussion for several years towards IMF accession. Forgive me if I'm misusing the legal terms. But the democratic country decided to put it to a democratic referendum after the deal was done. And this took place in our current world of disinformation and populism and skepticism about international institutions. And I gather our colleagues from Liechtenstein had a very lively summer, not only having to explain what they were doing and what the IMF is, but why it was in Liechtenstein's interest. And they successfully won the referendum. And we have here with us today, I'm fortunate to say, Daniel Risch, please forgive me, I'm getting tired. Daniel Risch, who's been Prime Minister of the Principality of Liechtenstein since March of 2021. He studied business and administration at the universities of St. Gallen, Zurich, and München. He received his doctorate in information systems, which is far more useful than economics, from the University of Freiburg. He's been a visiting scholar at the University of Melbourne. He's worked at a Swiss e-business. And in 2015, Prime Minister Risch returned to his homeland and became a member of the management of Liechtensteinische Post AG. And in 2017, he became Deputy Prime Minister and headed the Department of Infrastructure, Economy, and Sport until he was appointed Prime Minister 3.5 years ago. If I recall correctly, just to be clear, I believe the Prime Minister is also the Finance Minister for Liechtenstein, so this is one thing. We're also very glad to have with us, especially during the busy annual meetings week, Ms. Yan Liu, who is the General Counsel and Director of the Legal Department of the International Monetary Fund. As such, of course, she was responsible for overseeing and conducting much of the membership negotiations with any potential member country. That will be a smaller part of her job going forward because pretty much everyone is now a member country, but she will explain. But in her role as General Counsel and Director of the Legal Department, she advises the IMF's executive board, management staff, and country membership on all aspects, all legal aspects of the fund's operations. So we are going to have remarks on the record from Prime Minister Risch, and I will follow that with inviting both the Prime Minister and General Counsel Liu on stage, and we will have a substantive discussion from there. Thank you all for joining us online, and thanks especially to the Prime Minister and the General Counsel for letting us talk about something that actually is quite important and that might otherwise have been overlooked this.
Dear President Posen, dear General Counsel Liu, thank you for the warm welcome here at the Peterson Institute, the preeminent center of economic expertise in DC. It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm grateful for your long-standing partnership with Liechtenstein and especially the Liechtenstein Embassy here in DC. General Counsel Liu, thank you for being a part of this discussion today. As you mentioned, 1 month ago, the people of Liechtenstein have decided by popular vote to join the IMF. On Monday, I signed the Articles of Agreement at the State Department. This historic step for our country was the conclusion of a long process that was by no means straightforward. Several governments have tried. I am glad to lead the one that has succeeded. Why has Liechtenstein joined the IMF, and why did we join it now? The most pressing economic reason was the following. Until this Monday, Liechtenstein did not have a lender of last resort. With our small and open economy, globally active industrial firms, and highly interconnected financial sector, this was a risky state of affairs. None of the recent economic shocks, be it the pandemic, global financial turbulences, or the Russian aggression against Ukraine, have been of our own making, as you can imagine. And current developments do not point to a future with less volatility. In addition, our geographical situation exposes us to natural calamities as a country with 2/3 of the land area in mountain regions and with the impressive River Rhine alongside us. There are, of course, many other good reasons to join the fund, but I will focus on this one for the sake of brevity. We had a clear and strong case to make for risk mitigation. And after thorough preparations and intense discussions, the Liechtenstein Parliament approved our IMF membership by a quite large margin. As with every international treaty, the people of Liechtenstein have the constitutional right to call for a referendum. The people made use of that right, and what followed was an intense summer of campaigning. On the one side, the political leadership in Liechtenstein, including our head of state, united with major private sector voices in favor of the IMF. On the other side, a very vocal opposition gravitated along arguments ranging from loss of sovereignty to criticism of the IMF as an institution. Unseen to us in recent times was the level of misinformation about the cost of our membership, the conditions for lending, or the purposes of the fund. For the most part, statements made on those topics were either simply wrong or at best misleading. Yet, that misinformation was not easy to counter due to the technical nature of the issue at hand. We decided for meticulous, extensive, transparent information, even including sending every voter a full printout of the articles of agreement. At critical points in time, we also recognized that the political leadership had the responsibility to call out the most blatant cases of falsehoods. Our head of state, Heredity Prince Alois, and myself engaged intensely in these efforts. The main challenge for the government was voter mobilization against a well-organized no camp. Voter turnout was comparatively low for us with 60%, but enough for a clear result. The possibility to access emergency liquidity at the IMF turned out to be the dominant factor in voters' decision according to polls. The complexity of the topic also made people rely more strongly on the recommendations of the political institutions. I find this a reassuring outcome at a time when we all face erosion of trust in our established political institutions. Another positive outcome of the vote is that the democratic ownership of the Liechtenstein population for this historic milestone in Liechtenstein's economic and foreign policy. I suppose in most countries, the important mission of the IMF is not an everyday topic in the public discourse. In Liechtenstein, at least for a little while in the summer, it was. Now we are under the legitimate expectations of the people to make our membership beneficial for both our country and the IMF. I am confident that we will live up to these expectations, including at our first annual meeting and the upcoming initial Article 4 mission next January. I thank you again for your partnership, and I look forward to an interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and if I can ask Ms. Liu to also take the stage. I just want to make clear that we have at Peterson had a longstanding partnership of sorts, but mostly a substantive friendship with the Embassy of Liechtenstein, and we are genuinely very happy for you and for our friends at the IMF that this step has been taken. So I'm afraid there is a little bias here. Oh boy, there goes the mic. Putting that aside, putting all that aside, you focused in your remarks on the lender of last resort possibility for a small open economy subject to natural shocks like Liechtenstein. There were, of course, other arguments. What are the other things you hope your country will gain from being a full member now of the fund? And what do you think not you personally, but your membership will add or offer to the fund at this point?
So first of all, the important, I think it's my mic, is it? Yeah, so I just try to speak on, but it's not that easy, so we're trying.
Take my mic.
So we do it like this. So.
Sorry, we've gone all week with that.
Yeah. So now. Okay. All right. We do it like this. Yeah, that's better, much better. So, all right, we have the technique out. All right. So, you. Okay. So the question was, besides the lender of last resort, what are the advantages for Liechtenstein? What do we see? So first of all, I'd like to mention, hopefully we never need the lender of last resort capacities of the IMF, and I think for the time I can look at, it doesn't look we need it. But on our
Terribly sorry. Thank you.
No problem. So now we're back. So one thing is this international platform, meeting people from around the world in the financial sector or in the finance ministers and people from national banks is just a great opportunity for us. That's for sure. So that's one part. Being member of these 191 member states. Another is having access to expertise in the economic area and getting these expertise not only by talking to each other, but also with the Article 4 missions to get an outside view and also get hints on how can we do even better than we do now. So that's the second part. And a third part is, I mean, the IMF, as we all know, does really important statistics, and not being in means you don't have any visibility. And we think as a country, it also is about sovereignty. You should show up in international statistics. So these are three reasons aside of the lender of last resort.
A wonky think tank economist, the data one particularly excites me. And I assume you'll be providing some historic statistics as well, not just. Yeah. Not to make light of this, I mean, this is a very big step, and overcoming doubts about sovereignty, which come up in these kinds of discussions, is very important. But let me turn to General Counsel Liu. The IMF does not get a new member every day, in part because you already had members. But what does it mean for the IMF to take a further step and the near final step towards universality?
Thank you, Adam. First, let me thank Peterson Institute for hosting this event, and Prime Minister, really, it's a great pleasure to have this discussion with you today. This is a very important week for the fund and for Liechtenstein. I think we know 80 years ago, the 44 members convened in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and agreed to the establishment of the IMF and also the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which is the World Bank group. So we have really come a long way since that time. And 2 days ago, we were so excited to welcome Liechtenstein as our 191st member. So really bring the IMF to near universal membership. So that really means that almost all countries in the world are members of the fund, from Nauru with a population of 10,000 people to India or China with 1.4 billion people each. So you ask a very good question, what does that really mean for us to take a big step towards universality? I think you all know the history of the fund. We were really created literally out of the ashes of the Second World War. At that time, the goal was to have an institution focused on exchange rate and monetary cooperation, right? So that we would avoid competitive exchange rate devaluations and beggar-the-neighbor policies that have led to the Second World War. So a significant part of the fund's mandate is to foster international cooperation and macroeconomic stability. So this near universal membership really goes a long way towards supporting this mandate. So let me maybe quickly just highlight a number of key benefits of this near universal membership. I think Prime Minister already touched upon a couple. I think first, it really enhances the fund's ability to monitor and promote global economic stability. More members are involved, the better place the fund is to assess the trend and the risks of the global economy. And also more members means more data. You mentioned data issue, really on very economic conditions so that we can do a much better analysis and provide more informed advice to countries. I think the second is that a larger membership help distribute economic cost more evenly. So if one country faces a crisis, the impact on the IMF resources and also on our mission can be mitigated by the stability of our other member countries. I think the third, the IMF plays a very important role to foster international cooperation. I mentioned that earlier. So leveraging our convening power, we can really bring everybody around the table to discuss the common economic challenges and also identify solutions. So we're really facing a lot of challenges right now, from climate change, which you mentioned, to fintech issues, to governance, to many different things. So I think the more diverse perspectives and needs can be better represented at the fund. And this inclusivity, I think, can really help us to get a better policy advice. And also, in terms of our lending, better fund-supported programs. The last thing I would just mention is that we have most recently created a 25th chair at the executive board to really enhance the sub-Saharan Africa's representation in the IMF decision-making process.
Sorry. No, this is good to have you give us both the historic and the current context about membership and how the fund sees it. Prime Minister, if I could turn back to you, as you said in your opening remarks, and I'd like to ask you to expand, you personally, your government, the hereditary prince and others, had to stand up to misinformation, misleading information, but also just the general challenge of talking about a technocratic issue in a democracy. This is, again, something that maybe is not universal, but certainly is a widespread challenge for democracies in all countries around the world. Can you say a bit more about why you think you were able to prevail with the facts in such a challenging issue?
I can try to elaborate on that. Yeah. So first of all, I have to say, I mean, as we are a very democratic country, we are used to public referendums, and people are always right. So and it's important you have freedom of speech, and everyone can have a different view on something. But in this case, it was often not about different views, but on facts that were just misinterpreted or put wrong, and when it came to this yeah, to these points during summer, then we had to sometimes take paths that we have never done before, in being very outspoken and very clear, in not accepting these misinformation topics, and putting it clear with all the means we had, and even the prince at one time addressed the people regarding misinformation, and saying, well, we have to have a well-informed decision, so please look at it carefully, and try. There were also some fact-checking websites and stuff, so that this is really a well-informed decision in the end, and as it showed, we could then convince a majority of people, and really had a discussion. We had a public discussion as well. We invited the people to ask whatever they'd like to ask, because there was nothing to hide on our side. And I think that was important as well, to go this step to the people, and being open and transparent in everything we knew about the membership, and if there were questions we did not know, we tried to find out the answers, or tell the people we can't say now because it's something far in the future. So I think transparency, but also a clear and outspoken way was important, and you always know you can lose some. I mean, in these ways, you can lose some political capital, but it was just important to have a clear path.
Thank you very much. I would just note, earlier today we had Reserve Bank of New Zealand Governor Adrian Orr speaking here, and he's not an elected politician. It wasn't a referendum, but there were some similar themes about committing to in-depth and open communication with the public. And so let me turn back to Ms. Liu. Obviously, the IMF is a facts-based organization, and that's why many of us respect and rely on it in various ways. But equally, obviously, just because countries have already made the decision to be members doesn't mean that their membership or their views about the fund and their population remain calm, good, happy. How do you think you and the fund, you at the fund leadership, think about combating misinformation, not just in program countries, although of course it's very acute there potentially, but in general, long-time members who are being exposed to conspiracy theories or concerns about sovereignty and so on?
Yeah, this is a very important issue for us. You know, the work we do at IMF is complex. It's data-driven, and also is exclusively economic focused. So we do encounter instances of misinformation, namely, you know, a group of people or groups of people have an organic misunderstanding or misperception of what IMF does, and also the issues we're involved with, right? We're fully aware of how this issue of misinformation can sometimes lead to resistance to the IMF proposed reforms, particularly in the context of fund-supported programs, but not limited to that, even in the surveillance context, right? So we actually had a chapter in the recent World Economic Outlook report, which addresses this particular issue. So the report basically notes that the broad societal acceptability for policy changes have really frequently become the obstacle to the successful implementation of reforms. And the report discusses how the resistance to the reform actually transcends economic self-interest and instead is deeply rooted in behavioral factors such as perception, misinformation, and trust deficit. So I think to address this issue, for me, the very first thing is to have an effective communication and targeted information strategy to raise awareness for reform, whether it's surveillance, whether it's program context, and really correct the misperception and misinformation about all these measures and how we are going to implement that. I think in that regard, we maintain really various channels of communication with the public about what we do. For instance, we publish reports, economic analysis, the country data, and our own policies at our website. And we also explain all this issue through social media, podcasts or blogs and videos. I think second is that these communication strategies must be backed by very strong institutional frameworks that foster trust and also encourage two-way dialogue from the very beginning of the policy design. You can't just come in at the very end. You have to engage, explain from the very beginning. So in this respect, as IMF Legal Department, we really play an important role in helping strengthen not only the IMF's, but also country members' legal and institution framework. For example, with respect to central bank mandates, debt transparency, governance, among others. I think the third is that a thorough consultations with all stakeholders is also very essential for us to identify measures to address the societal concerns that could undercut the support for reform. So there, basically, again, we have open lines of communication with media to explain what we do, and management and staff engage with various stakeholders, including CSOs and academics. For example, on Monday, the managing director hosted an annual town hall with CSOs to seek their support for the institution's direction and also policy advice on key issues.
So meaning civil society organizations.
Thank you. So in addition to this sort of regional or country-focused engagement, we also frequently incorporate external consultations into the process for developing our own policies. That's also very, very important. So I think, end of the day, the only way to really address misinformation is to ensure that we provide strong policy advice and support to our member countries.
Thank you. It's a lot. And so in that regard, Prime Minister, your future economic and political debates in Liechtenstein, obviously, as you said, lively democracy, freedom of speech, heavy use of, or at least frequent use of referenda. What lessons do you take away from this process of the summer? What's coming up that you will handle, not in the sense of spin, but in the sense of engaging going forward, that you have picked up from this victory?
To General Counsel Liu already mentioned some of the main aspects that we also learned during this campaign and also in campaigns before. And first of all, I mean, it might sound a little bit unexpected from a politician, but it is okay to lose a vote every now and then in a democracy. So it is really possible that people have another judgment than politicians do. So if somebody says, well, the lender of last resort case is very unlikely, and therefore we don't need, for example, an IMF membership, then that's a view you can have, but it should not be made on misinformation. So therefore, I really believe what you already mentioned, data-driven or science-driven and analytically driven information is key. You need fact-checking if you like in your country that people can rely on, and then trust comes in. So whom do I trust? And I mentioned in the polls we had, it was said in this case the people relied more on the institutions, political institutions, than in other votes, because it was a little bit complex maybe. So that's a good sign, I would say. But you need to get the information to the people, and that's what we've seen in many countries, but also in Liechtenstein. More than 50% are not consuming classical newspapers or classical news. So how do we reach them? And I'm convinced you need to have a voice in social media. I mean, a lot of people inform themselves by TikTok. What's I can't understand, but it's fact. So you have to take this into consideration. And I think it's underestimated how much political discussion takes place also in families and in other social arrangements where you have to happen or have to take place somehow. So you have to get in with the facts, with the information, and I think this is really something we have to focus on. There's no need to have all the facts, but people can't consume it, and that was something we normally don't do in campaigns, that we fill town halls and sit there and discuss. But in this case, we did it, and I think it was also an important step in addressing people and saying, well, come together and talk. It's an important thing to discuss and to be open. And I think we learned a lot, and we're looking forward.
As our online audience knows, I'm not always this nice and complimentary. I genuinely admire what both of you are saying, and I know there are a lot of politicians and a lot of economic technocrats around the world who would like to emulate that, but may feel it's a little difficult. So in that sense, we hope our video today on social media and elsewhere helps at least inspire some of this democratic rhetoric in the sense of engagement. So finally, Ms. Liu, again, forgive my pronunciation. Obviously, in the case of Liechtenstein, as we've been discussing, the people of the country took an informed decision to join the fund. You've said a little bit already about how the fund is trying various channels, various ways to reach the public of all members, but in different ways. But in a more proactive sense, I mean, what do you think is the message you want to get out about how the fund is relevant to its membership, particularly for countries that are not in programs, or like Liechtenstein can say, yes, lender of last resort, but maybe not so likely?
Yeah, so first I want to say is that we, of course, refer to each country's domestic, legal, and institutional processes in coming to a decision to join the IMF. And as Prime Minister mentioned, Liechtenstein really took a very deliberate approach to joining the IMF. And you had a very rigorous debate, right, across the country, really recognizing all the risks you face and also coming to terms in terms of how to address those risks. So I think that's a very important step in the process. We really value all the efforts that went into this decision, particularly on part of the government Prime Minister. So maybe I will say one thing. As a lawyer, I have to say I'm very delighted that every voter was given a hard copy of Articles of Agreement, which I really don't expect we can replicate that in many countries. But This is, of course, is a unique case of new membership to the IMF. And, you know, as you mentioned, it probably will be a less frequent occurrence for us, given our near universal membership. But I think in general, the practice of really candid, wide-ranging, and deliberate debate on the economic, financial, or monetary stability applies across membership. And I think the lessons from the Liechtenstein's very comprehensive approach are really well noted. On our part, I think it is very important for us to continue communicating, right? Not only the benefits and also our responsibilities of being a member of the IMF, perhaps more importantly for us to articulate and explain our evolving role and mission to the membership. I think this has become even more important in recent times as we step up to embrace the new and evolving reality, actually, right? Realities which have a macro critical implication for membership. We mentioned climate change, we mentioned fintech. I mean, there are many, many new topics. So I think it's very important not only sort of explain, but also show through our actions. One example, I just gave you one example. Last week, we announced a very important reform that leverages the strong financial position of the IMF to reduce the burden of charges and surcharges on our regular lending, and also put in place a comprehensive package that more than doubles our concessional lending capacity for low-income countries in a self-sustaining manner. So we also have to explain what we have done for our membership. The last thing I just mentioned is that it is actually becoming very important in our times of intensifying fragmentation, right? Globally, we are all concerned with increasing fragmentation. So I think the IMF really has a critical role to explain what we do and how we bring members together to act collectively.
Thank you. Is there anything you'd like to add on that front, Prime Minister, about global fragmentation, or?
Not on fragmentation, but I think on these processes, we talked about fact-checking and getting in touch with the people. And I think one thing that is really important is that you try to understand the opposition or the no camp. So first you have to understand before you can seek to be understood. And I think that is always a very intense process to really get involved with the contra arguments or with against arguments, that you understand what's in it, because sometimes there are good reasons to be again, and you have to really take this into account before you go out and say, well, the truth is like this from our point of view.
Awesome. I'm very grateful to both the fund and General Counsel Liu, and to the government and the Embassy of Liechtenstein in Washington, for, of course, Prime Minister Risch, for giving us this opportunity to go a little outside the normal annual meetings week, macro week discussion onto themes of governance, communication, accountability that are pressingly important. This is, of course, not the only discussion of responding to disinformation taking place in Washington this week or this month, but I think it's an important one to add to the mix, and we're grateful to our global audience online for, in the spirit of what both our speakers have said, spreading information as opposed to disinformation, and the, frankly, I think, inspiring message that the Prime Minister and the General Counsel gave us today. Thank you very much.